If a locked door ever opens beneath your feet, pray that the truth arrives before the judgment does. Evelyn Carter had spent her entire life learning how to disappear. At 22, the quiet Omega knew exactly where to stand during every royal celebration, behind the musicians, beside the serving tables, and always several steps behind her older sister Victoria. Tonight, Blackwood Palace shimmered beneath silver chandeliers, as nobles from every corner of the Northern Territories gathered for the Moon Ascension banquet. Crystal glasses reflected candlelight across polished marble floors, laughter floated through the grand hall, and every conversation eventually circled back to one name: Alpha King Adrian Blackwood. Some called him ruthless. Others called him the strongest ruler in generations. No one dared call him ordinary. Evelyn kept her eyes lowered as she carried a silver tray between elegantly dressed guests. Her plain blue gown made her nearly invisible among jeweled dresses and embroidered cloaks, exactly the way Victoria preferred it. "Smile less," Victoria whispered as she brushed past her. "People might think you're trying to be noticed." Evelyn answered with a quiet nod. Arguing had never changed anything. Moments later, Victoria appeared again, this time holding a sparkling glass of berry punch. "You look exhausted," she said with unexpected sweetness. "Drink this before you faint and embarrass the family." The kindness felt unfamiliar, but after hours of serving guests, Evelyn accepted the glass with a grateful smile. The cool drink tasted faintly of berries and herbs. Before she could thank her sister, Victoria had already vanished into the crowd. Music swelled as dancers filled the center of the ballroom. Evelyn tried to return to work, but the room suddenly seemed farther away. The chandeliers blurred into streaks of silver light. Voices echoed as though drifting through deep water. She blinked hard, gripping the edge of a marble column. Her heartbeat slowed into a strange, heavy rhythm. Something wasn't right. She attempted another step, but her knees weakened beneath her. The last thing she remembered was the distant sound of the palace clock striking midnight. When consciousness finally returned, soft morning light spilled across carved wooden beams overhead. Evelyn stared at an unfamiliar ceiling, her thoughts clouded with confusion. Fine linen covered her, and the scent of cedar and winter pine lingered in the quiet room. She pushed herself upright just as the massive chamber doors burst open. Royal guards froze. Noblewomen gasped. Footsteps thundered into the room. And standing only a few feet away, dressed in a dark formal coat with calm silver eyes fixed on hers, was Alpha King Adrian Blackwood. The silence that followed felt heavier than any accusation. Evelyn could not breathe. Her pulse pounded in her ears as dozens of stunned faces stared through the open doorway. Royal guards stood frozen beside embarrassed attendants, while noble guests crowded into the hall, each one trying to glimpse the impossible scene unfolding before them. Evelyn looked down at herself, realizing she was still wrapped in a warm royal blanket instead of her own cloak. Panic tightened her chest. She hurriedly climbed from the bed, nearly stumbling as dizziness returned. "Your Majesty, I do not understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I do not know how I came here." No one answered her. Instead, whispers swept through the crowd like a cold wind moving across winter trees. Some covered their mouths in disbelief. Others exchanged knowing smiles that carried more judgment than words ever could. Within seconds, a story had already been written for her, and she had not spoken more than a single sentence. Then another familiar voice broke through the murmurs. "Evelyn." Victoria stepped into the doorway with wide eyes and perfectly timed shock painted across her face. She pressed one trembling hand against her chest as though the sight had broken her heart. "How could you?" The words landed harder than any shout. Evelyn stared at her sister, searching for confusion, concern, anything genuine. Instead, she caught the faintest flicker of satisfaction before it disappeared beneath another performance of disbelief. Members of the Carter family quickly gathered behind Victoria. Their mother lowered her head in visible shame while their father refused to look at Evelyn at all. "You have disgraced this family," he said quietly. "We raised you better than this." Evelyn felt the room tilt again. "Father, I swear I never came here willingly. I remember drinking the berry punch and then..." Her voice faded as the memory slipped through her fingers like smoke. Berry punch. Victoria's unexpected kindness. The strange heaviness behind her eyes. She looked toward her sister, But Victoria only shook her head with wounded disappointment. "Please stop," Victoria said softly. "Do not make excuses that only make this worse." Several nobles nodded in agreement. One elderly council member folded his arms. "The reputation of the crown cannot become the subject of gossip. This matter must be addressed immediately." Every sentence seemed to pull Evelyn farther away from the truth she could not yet explain. She searched the room until her eyes finally found Adrian Blackwood again. The Alpha King had not raised his voice once. He simply stood beside the tall windows where pale morning sunlight outlined his dark coat with silver edges. His expression remained unreadable, neither angry nor sympathetic. He studied every face in the room instead of speaking. That silence frightened Evelyn more than condemnation ever could. If he believed the rumors, nothing she said would matter. If he did not, why was he allowing everyone else to judge her? She lowered her gaze, fighting the sting behind her eyes. She had spent years enduring quiet humiliation, but never before had she felt so completely alone. Around her, servants carefully avoided meeting her eyes as though disgrace itself could spread by looking too long. Outside the chamber, bells announced the beginning of a new day across Blackwood Palace. Inside, every heartbeat seemed to count down toward a decision that could change the rest of her life. Adrian finally took one slow step forward. The whispers stopped instantly. Hundreds of eyes turned toward their king, waiting for the first words that would decide whether the frightened Omega standing in the center of the royal chamber would leave as a criminal, a liar, or something no one had yet imagined. Adrian Blackwood stopped only a few feet from Evelyn, his silver eyes calm enough to quiet an entire room without a single command. Every noble waited for him to pronounce judgment, yet he said nothing. Instead, he looked first at Evelyn, then at the overturned chair beside the bed, the untouched breakfast tray resting near the fireplace, and finally toward the half-empty crystal glass that still stood on a small table beside the window. His gaze lingered there for only a heartbeat before returning to the crowd. "Escort Miss Carter to the Grand Council Hall," he said evenly. "She will be treated with respect until this matter is examined." The order surprised everyone. There was no anger in his voice. There was no accusation either. Yet the silence that followed somehow felt even more unsettling. Two palace attendants stepped forward, offering Evelyn a fresh cloak to replace the blanket around her shoulders. She accepted it with trembling hands, grateful for even that small kindness. As she walked through the palace corridors, whispers followed her from every direction. Servants paused in their work. Guards exchanged uncertain glances. Noble guests leaned together, eager to share rumors before the truth had any chance to catch them. By the time Evelyn entered the Grand Council Hall, it seemed the entire palace had already decided her story. The enormous chamber glowed beneath stained glass windows that painted the marble floor with shifting colors of blue and gold. At the center stood the Circle of Judgment, a polished stone platform reserved for matters involving the crown. Evelyn had never imagined standing there. She wished she never would again. Victoria arrived moments later, dressed perfectly despite the early hour. Tears shimmered in her eyes, drawing immediate sympathy from those around her. She bowed respectfully before the council before turning toward Evelyn with practiced sorrow. "I begged my sister to remain in the guest quarters after the banquet," Victoria said gently. "She seemed tired, but I never imagined she would wander into the royal residence." Her careful wording never directly accused Evelyn, yet each sentence quietly pointed every suspicion toward her. Their father stepped forward next, shoulders heavy with disappointment. "The Carter family has always honored the laws of the Northern Territories. Whatever mistakes have been made, we place ourselves at the mercy of the crown." Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. Not once did he ask whether she was all right. Not once did he ask what she remembered. She opened her mouth. "Please listen to me. I remember accepting a drink from Victoria." After that, everything became unclear. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Victoria's expression crumbled into apparent heartbreak. "Evelyn," she whispered, "do you truly believe I would ever harm my own sister?" Several council members frowned. One elderly noble slowly shook his head. Without proof, such accusations only deepen this tragedy. Evelyn's courage faltered. The memories remained broken, scattered beyond her reach. She could not explain how she reached the king's chamber because she genuinely did not know. Every answer she tried to offer sounded weaker than the last. Across the hall, Adrian remained seated upon the raised platform reserved for the throne. His posture never changed. He listened to every word with remarkable patience, his attention drifting from one speaker to another, never interrupting, never revealing his thoughts. Most people mistook his silence for indifference. Evelyn almost believed it herself. Then, for the briefest moment, she noticed something unexpected. As Victoria lowered her eyes, Adrian's gaze shifted not toward her face, but toward the delicate silver bracelet resting against her wrist. His expression remained perfectly composed, but something sharp flickered behind those calm silver eyes, as though one tiny detail had quietly refused to fit the story everyone else was so eager to believe. No one noticed the change except the king. While the council debated honor and reputation, Adrian Blackwood watched details everyone else ignored. He had learned long ago that truth rarely announced itself with loud voices. It revealed itself through quiet mistakes. Victoria kept twisting the silver bracelet around her wrist whenever Evelyn mentioned the berry punch. Their father answered questions before anyone directed them toward him. Even the palace servants standing near the entrance looked confused rather than offended, exchanging uncertain glances each time another accusation was made. Adrian slowly rose from his seat. The hall fell completely silent. Every noble expected a verdict, yet his voice remained calm. This council exists to discover facts, not reward assumptions. His words echoed across the marble chamber. Until every question has been answered, no judgment will be delivered. A wave of disappointment swept through those hoping for a swift resolution. One council elder stepped forward and bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, the reputation of the crown demands immediate action. Adrian met the man's gaze without raising his voice. The reputation of the crown is protected by truth, not haste. No one challenged him again. Evelyn felt a small breath escape her lungs. It was not freedom, but it was the first moment that did not feel completely hopeless. Adrian turned toward the captain of the royal guard. Seal the king's private chamber. No object inside is to be touched until I have completed my inspection. The captain bowed immediately. Yes, Your Majesty. Victoria's smile almost disappeared before she forced it back into place. It lasted less than a heartbeat, but Adrian noticed. He noticed everything. Evelyn did not understand why the king's attention seemed to drift toward the smallest details instead of the dramatic accusations filling the room. She lowered her eyes, convinced she was simply delaying an unavoidable punishment. Yet Adrian's thoughts had already moved somewhere else entirely. When he had awakened before sunrise, he had found Evelyn unconscious in the chair beside the fireplace rather than near his bed. A folded blanket had rested neatly across her shoulders. The chamber door had remained locked from the inside, exactly as he always secured it before sleeping. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been disturbed. None of it matched the story being built around her. Someone had carefully arranged a scandal, but they had overlooked simple facts. Adrian remembered another detail as clearly as the morning light itself. A faint herbal scent had lingered near the crystal glass beside the window, subtle enough that most people would never recognize it. Years earlier, the royal physicians had taught him to identify calming herbs often used to ease anxiety before difficult ceremonies. Used properly, they were harmless. Mixed carelessly, they could leave someone confused for hours. That memory settled quietly into place beside every other unanswered question. He walked down from the raised platform and crossed the chamber at an unhurried pace. Instead of stopping beside the council, he paused directly before Evelyn. She instinctively lowered her head, unable to meet his silver eyes. Miss Carter, he said gently, when was the last moment you clearly remember? Evelyn closed her eyes, forcing herself through the fog inside her memory. My sister handed me a glass of berry punch, she answered softly. I thanked her. I remember the music becoming distant. After that, only darkness. Adrian nodded once, neither surprised nor convinced. Then he turned toward Victoria. Lady Victoria, he asked with the same calm expression, would you kindly tell this council exactly where you were during the final hour of the banquet? For the first time that morning, Victoria did not answer immediately. Victoria drew a slow breath before lifting her chin with practiced composure. I spent the final hour greeting guests from the Eastern Ridge Pack, she answered. Many people saw me there. Several nobles nodded at once, eager to support her claim. Adrian did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked toward the master of ceremonies standing near the council table. Please bring me the guest registry. The elderly official hurried forward with a leather-bound ledger, carefully opening the pages that recorded every formal greeting made during the banquet. Adrian scanned the entries without changing expression. Then he quietly closed the book. According to the registry, the Eastern Ridge delegation departed nearly 45 minutes before midnight. A ripple of surprise crossed the chamber. Victoria blinked once. Perhaps I remembered the time incorrectly. Perhaps, Adrian replied evenly. His calm voice never accused her, yet every answer she offered seemed to weaken beneath its own weight. He turned toward another palace servant, who prepared the refreshments served to the Carter family. A young maid stepped forward, visibly nervous. The kitchens prepared everything, Your Majesty. Lady Victoria personally requested 2 glasses of berry punch shortly before the final dance. Evelyn's heart tightened. She had almost forgotten that moment until now. The maid continued carefully. Lady Victoria asked that no one else deliver them because she wished to surprise her sister. Victoria quickly smiled. It was only a kind gesture. Evelyn looked tired after serving all evening. Adrian gave the slightest nod. I do not question the gesture. I question everything that followed. The chamber grew so quiet that the crackling fireplace became the loudest sound in the room. Adrian motioned toward the captain of the royal guard, who entered carrying a small velvet tray. Resting upon it was the crystal glass recovered from the king's private chamber. A faint stain still clung to the bottom. Royal physician Helena examined the remaining contents, the captain announced. She discovered traces of moonflower and silver balm. Several council members exchanged puzzled looks. The physician herself stepped forward. Neither herb is poisonous, she explained. However, together they may cause temporary confusion, unusual drowsiness, and fragmented memory, especially in someone who has eaten very little. Every eye turned toward Evelyn. She remembered skipping dinner while serving guests. Suddenly the strange heaviness, the blurred lights, and the missing hours no longer felt like a mystery. They fit together with terrifying clarity. Victoria immediately shook her head. Anyone could have tampered with that drink after Evelyn disappeared. Adrian's silver eyes rested on her with quiet patience. That possibility has not been dismissed. His answer surprised everyone, including Victoria herself. He was still refusing to rush toward any conclusion. Instead, he continued gathering every missing piece. Captain, Adrian said, who unlocked my chamber? This morning. No one, Your Majesty, the captain answered. The door was still secured from the inside when the morning attendants arrived. We used the emergency master key kept inside the royal vault. Another silence settled across the chamber. Evelyn slowly looked toward the king. If the room had remained locked from the inside all night, then whoever had placed her there could not have simply walked out through the door afterward. The realization spread from one face to another. Confusion replaced certainty. The story everyone had accepted only an hour earlier was beginning to collapse under its own contradictions. Adrian folded his hands behind his back, as though he had reached only the middle of a much longer investigation. His gaze drifted toward the tall windows where pale sunlight illuminated the stone balcony outside his chamber. One curtain moved gently in the morning breeze. It was almost invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. Then Adrian spoke 4 quiet words that caused even the royal guard to stiffen. Search every exterior balcony. The order spread through Blackwood Palace with astonishing speed. Within minutes, royal guards moved across every exterior walkway connected to the king's private residence. Council members remained inside the grand hall, their conversations reduced to uneasy whispers as everyone waited for answers that suddenly felt much more complicated than anyone had expected. Evelyn stood quietly near the center of the chamber, her hands folded tightly beneath her borrowed cloak. She no longer knew whether to hope or fear what would happen next. Adrian remained perfectly still beside the council table, his attention fixed on the open doors rather than the restless nobles around him. Time seemed to slow until hurried footsteps echoed across the marble floor. The captain of the royal guard returned carrying a small velvet pouch sealed with the royal crest. He bowed deeply before placing it in Adrian's hand. Your Majesty, this was discovered beneath the eastern balcony outside your private chamber. It had fallen into the ivy below. Adrian loosened the drawstring and carefully emptied the contents onto the polished table. A delicate silver perfume bottle rolled gently beside a silk handkerchief embroidered with the Carter family crest. The entire chamber stared in silence. Evelyn frowned with confusion. She had never owned either item. Victoria's face lost its color for only an instant before she forced another composed smile. Those belong to many ladies in our household, she answered quickly. Anyone could have misplaced them. Adrian picked up the perfume bottle without responding. Royal Physician Helena. The physician stepped forward and uncorked the tiny crystal container. She inhaled cautiously before looking toward the council. This fragrance contains concentrated moonflower essence, the same herb found inside the remaining berry punch. The room erupted with quiet gasps. Victoria instinctively took one step backward before catching herself. Adrian gently returned the bottle to the table. Still, he said calmly, this proves opportunity, not guilt. His fairness surprised even those who had begun doubting Victoria. He refused to condemn anyone without certainty. Then another guard entered carrying a folded length of dark climbing rope. Your Majesty, we discovered this secured beneath the eastern balcony. It reaches the private garden below. Every eye turned toward the rope. The impossible suddenly became possible. Someone had reached the king's chamber from outside, leaving the door locked from within exactly as Adrian had remembered. The carefully constructed scandal had depended upon everyone assuming there had been only one way into the room. Adrian slowly faced the assembly. Miss Carter could not have locked herself inside after losing consciousness. Someone transported her there and departed through the balcony. No one argued. The evidence had quietly dismantled every accusation built against Evelyn. Tears filled her eyes, not from sorrow this time, but from overwhelming relief. She had almost accepted that no one would ever believe her. Adrian walked toward her until only a single step separated them. Without hesitation, he unclasped the dark royal cloak from his own shoulders and gently placed it around hers. The heavy fabric settled across Evelyn with unexpected warmth. A stunned silence swept through the grand hall. The royal cloak was more than protection from the cold. It represented the personal protection of the Alpha King himself. Adrian's voice remained calm, yet every word carried unmistakable authority. Until this investigation is complete, Evelyn Carter stands under my direct protection. No accusation, insult, or rumor against her will be tolerated. Several nobles immediately lowered their heads. Evelyn looked up in complete disbelief. She had expected questions, perhaps sympathy if she was fortunate. She had never imagined the king himself would stand between her and an entire kingdom. Across the chamber, Victoria stared at the royal cloak resting on her sister's shoulders, and for the first time since the banquet began, genuine fear replaced every trace of her carefully practiced confidence. The atmosphere inside the Grand Council Hall had changed completely. Only an hour earlier, every whisper had carried suspicion toward Evelyn. Now those same voices had fallen silent, replaced by uncertainty and cautious glances. Adrian stood beside her without speaking, allowing the weight of his decision to settle over the room. The royal cloak resting on Evelyn's shoulders had become an unmistakable message. Anyone who challenged her now challenged the authority of the Alpha King himself. Victoria forced herself to step forward once more, though the confidence that had guided her all morning was beginning to crack. Your Majesty, she said with measured calm, I understand your desire for fairness, but surely these discoveries do not prove that I had anything to do with this unfortunate situation. Adrian turned toward her with the same composed expression he had maintained since dawn. You are correct, he answered. They do not. Relief briefly returned to Victoria's face. Then Adrian continued, which is why I requested one final report before reaching any conclusion. The great doors opened once again. This time, the commander of the Palace Night Watch entered carrying a polished wooden case. He bowed deeply before placing it on the council table. As instructed, Your Majesty, we questioned every guard assigned to the Eastern Gardens during the banquet. Adrian nodded. Please continue. The commander opened the case and removed several written statements. 3 guards independently reported seeing a woman in a silver evening gown leaving the Eastern Garden shortly after midnight. They believed she was returning from the celebration and did not stop her because members of noble families were free to move throughout the palace grounds. Victoria's fingers tightened around the folds of her dress. Many ladies wore silver gowns, she replied quickly. That description proves nothing. Agreed, Adrian said. On its own, it proves very little. He lifted another document from the case. However, one gardener discovered that a decorative rose arbor beside the eastern balcony had been damaged during the night. A strand of fabric became caught on one of the branches. Adrian unfolded a small piece of shimmering silver cloth. It matched Victoria's gown perfectly. The room became so quiet that Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat. Victoria stared at the fabric, struggling to form an answer. Someone could have planted it, she whispered. Adrian looked toward the palace tailor, who had quietly stepped forward after being summoned earlier that morning. The elderly craftsman adjusted his spectacles before speaking. Your Majesty, this embroidery pattern was commissioned exclusively for Lady Victoria Carter 3 months ago. No second gown with this design exists. A wave of disbelief swept through the council. Evelyn slowly turned toward her sister, unable to recognize the woman she had trusted for so many years. Memories suddenly returned with painful clarity. Victoria insisting she drink the berry punch. Victoria disappearing into the crowd immediately afterward. Victoria arriving at the king's chamber just a little too quickly when the doors were opened. The pieces finally fit together. Their father lowered his head, his face drained of color. Victoria, he said quietly, tell me this is not true. She looked from her father to the council, then toward Adrian, searching desperately for an escape that no longer existed. None appeared. Adrian's voice remained steady, free of anger or triumph. Lady Victoria Carter, the evidence indicates that someone deliberately created false circumstances intended to damage both Miss Carter's reputation and the dignity of the crown. Until every remaining detail has been verified, you will remain under royal supervision. No chains were brought forward. No harsh punishment followed. Even now, Adrian chose restraint over spectacle. Yet Victoria understood what everyone else now understood as well. The story she had carefully written for her sister had unraveled before the entire kingdom, and the truth had begun speaking far louder than any lie ever could. No celebration followed the revelation. Blackwood Palace remained unusually quiet, as though even the ancient stone walls understood that truth often arrived carrying sorrow along with justice. Members of the council slowly departed in respectful silence while royal guards escorted Victoria from the chamber under formal supervision. She did not resist. She simply walked with lowered eyes, the confidence that had once illuminated every graceful step, now replaced by a silence heavier than words. Their parents lingered only long enough to offer stiff bows before leaving as well, unable to meet Evelyn's gaze. For the first time in her life, Evelyn realized that being believed did not immediately erase years of loneliness. She stood alone beneath the towering stained glass windows, still wrapped in Adrian's dark cloak. The fabric felt surprisingly warm despite the cool morning air drifting through the open balcony doors. She stared toward the palace gardens where sunlight glimmered across fountains and white stone paths, wondering how one single night had managed to change everything she thought she knew about her family, her future, and herself. Soft footsteps approached behind her. You may keep the cloak for now, Adrian said calmly. The morning air is colder than it appears. Evelyn turned quickly, almost forgetting to bow. Your Majesty, thank you. You did not have to defend me. Adrian shook his head almost imperceptibly. I defended the truth. You simply deserved the chance to be heard. His answer settled gently in her heart. No grand promise. No unnecessary comfort. Only quiet honesty. For reasons she could not explain, that honesty meant more than any dramatic declaration ever could. A gentle breeze drifted through the chamber, carrying the fresh scent of pine from the surrounding forests. As it passed between them, Adrian suddenly became very still. Something ancient stirred beneath the disciplined calm that had guided him throughout the investigation. His wolf, silent for years in the presence of countless noblewomen, unexpectedly awakened. Not with aggression, not with dominance, with recognition. The sensation arrived like distant moonlight touching still water.
Familiar. Impossible.
His heartbeat slowed instead of quickening, and for the briefest instant, every other sound inside the palace seemed to disappear. Evelyn felt it too, though she did not understand what was happening. A comforting warmth spread through the royal cloak resting across her shoulders before settling gently against her chest. She instinctively placed one hand over her heart, confused by the peaceful feeling replacing the fear she had carried since waking inside the king's chamber. Neither of them spoke. They simply looked at one another as though some invisible thread had quietly appeared between two lives that had never truly crossed until now. Near the doorway, royal physician Helena paused before entering. Her experienced eyes moved from Adrian to Evelyn and then to the faint silver shimmer that briefly flickered across the edge of the king's cloak before fading again. She said nothing, but wisdom gathered through decades at court allowed her to recognize what younger eyes might easily dismiss. Some bonds did not announce themselves with spectacle. They revealed themselves through moments of complete trust. Adrian finally broke the silence. You have endured enough for one morning. Guest chambers have been prepared for you until this investigation officially concludes. Evelyn hesitated. After everything that happened, why are you showing me such kindness? Adrian held her gaze for a quiet moment before answering. Because someone tried very hard to convince this kingdom that you were unworthy of it. Neither of them noticed the elderly palace historian watching from the far end of the corridor. He smiled faintly as morning light reflected across the silver embroidery of the royal cloak. In a voice barely louder than a whisper, he spoke only to himself. Sometimes the moon does not reveal destiny during ceremonies. Sometimes it waits until one soul chooses to protect another before asking for anything in return. By sunset, Blackwood Palace no longer echoed with rumors. It echoed with quiet reflection. The official investigation concluded before the evening bells, confirming that Evelyn had been deliberately placed at the center of a carefully planned deception. The council formally cleared her name, and a written declaration bearing the royal seal was delivered throughout every noble household before nightfall. No celebration was ordered. Adrian believed that restoring someone's dignity should never become another public performance. It should simply become the truth. Victoria accepted responsibility for arranging the deception, and was sentenced to leave the royal court indefinitely under the supervision of distant relatives beyond the northern border. The punishment was measured rather than cruel, giving her time to reflect instead of condemning her to a lifetime defined by a single terrible decision. The Carter family quietly departed the palace, carrying with them the heavy understanding that silence in the face of injustice can wound as deeply as false accusation. Evelyn watched their carriage disappear beyond the palace gates without anger. She only felt sadness for everything they had allowed themselves to become. Later that evening, she stood alone upon the western terrace overlooking the endless pine forest stretching toward the horizon. The first stars appeared one by one above the mountains while a gentle breeze carried the scent of cedar through the cool air. Adrian joined her without ceremony, his footsteps steady against the white stone. For several peaceful moments, neither of them spoke. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt honest. Evelyn carefully removed the royal cloak from her shoulders and held it toward him. "Thank you for lending me your protection," she said softly. Adrian looked at the folded cloak but did not take it. "Keep it a little longer." Evelyn blinked in surprise. "I cannot. People will misunderstand." A faint smile appeared in his usually reserved expression. "People have already spent an entire day misunderstanding you. They can survive one more." Evelyn laughed quietly before she could stop herself. It was the first genuine laugh she had allowed herself in years, and hearing it seemed to brighten even the evening air around them. Adrian looked toward the rising moon before speaking again. "There is something I wish to make clear." Evelyn waited patiently. "I will never ask you to remain here because of rumors, obligation, or destiny," he said. "If one day you choose to stay, I want it to be because you trust the person standing beside you." His words settled gently between them, carrying neither pressure nor expectation. Evelyn looked into his calm silver eyes and realized that true strength did not demand loyalty. It earned it. She drew one slow breath, feeling the quiet warmth that had first appeared that morning still resting peacefully within her heart. "Then," she answered with a small hopeful smile, Perhaps today is not the end of this story. Above them, the full moon rose over Blackwood Palace, bathing the ancient kingdom in silver light. Somewhere deep within the silent forest, a lone wolf lifted its voice toward the stars, not as a warning, but as a promise that even after the darkest misunderstanding, truth, kindness, and courage could still lead two lonely hearts toward the future they never expected to find.